Welcome to the Loosen Up Your Painting podcast, the podcast for creatives looking to get inspiration, tips and advice on anything to do with art and creativity. If you enjoy creating something, then this is the podcast for you. I'm your host, Malcolm Dewey, a full-time artist at malcolmdeweyfineart.com, and let's begin the show. Welcome back to the Loosen Up Your Painting podcast. Good to be talking to you again. This time more about painting tips and inspiration. Now, one of the things that every artist seems to have trouble with, especially landscape artists, is finding a beautiful subject to paint. Not everyone's lucky enough to live in a beautiful environment where you can walk out the door and be inspired by your landscape. In fact, it's unlikely that that's going to be the case for just about anyone, because we tend to become so used to our own environment. Over a certain period of time, it becomes quite boring to us. But there are occasions where you may be living in a city or town that really is not very inspiring at all. And I received a question from one of my art students who said that she felt that she was losing her creativity because her environment, the city she lived in, is so difficult to find inspiration. A lot of highways, chaotic traffic, high-rise buildings, concrete block structures, really very, very unattractive. And I said to her, well, there are ways to just try to re-look at the subject. And then she sent me a video, and I must admit I couldn't find a lot inspiring in that video, with all these very ugly concrete block towers and blocks of apartments, and yes, all of the traffic, the mass of people rushing about. However, I think that's one of the factors in just about every city as well. So you kind of have to perhaps just take a bit of extra effort to find something. But I wanted to sort of break this problem down instead of getting a situation where we have to defend the fact that our environment is so uninspiring. Let's try to look at it a bit more constructively and find a solution to this problem. So we're not solely dependent on stock photos, for instance, or the photos that I provide in my lessons or classes, but rather equipping you with a method or an approach which is going to help you find inspiring subjects a lot more easier. So as I said, this is a common issue. Our familiar surroundings become uninspiring due to them being mundane, chaotic, unattractive, or we're just so used to them. Now, something to keep in mind is that a tourist coming to your part of town or your city may find that the place is quite inspiring because of the energy, the vibrancy, things going on. They are interested in it. It's an entirely new experience. It may be overwhelming at first, but probably they're going to be taking lots of photographs and trying to soak up the atmosphere and get some inspiration perhaps later on and create some paintings from that. But the point is, fresh eyes make for a fresh experience. If we can try to replicate that or something like it, we start to see like an artist. We start to look for compositions. So seeing like an artist involves finding beauty and potential in the everyday. Scenes that we are used to, maybe scenes that are mundane, unattractive, and don't look like much. Very often I get that from students who look at the reference photo and wonder why I'm bothering to paint something that looks so boring, and then remarking that the painting has taken the subject into an entirely new direction, maybe with composition, maybe with color, and now it looks really attractive. So one of the strategies that I find very important is that you have to look for the mass shapes of light and dark. Now, let's say you're in a city center and you've got high-rise buildings all around you and people and lots of noise and traffic, it may be very difficult to concentrate in that moment. If you can get out your camera on your phone or your own camera and just take some photographs, you may be able to then go back to your studio, look at them, or maybe even in the moment, if it's on your camera phone, you can look at the photo and immediately start looking for where are the big dark shapes, where are the light shapes. And then if you have a very generalized type of scene, the next step is to crop out parts of that scene. And usually if you crop into the scene and make the focal area a much more simplified part of that photograph. In other words, look for a strong dark mass shape, perhaps to be the armature or the frame on which the lights are looking a lot more attractive. So you'll have a dark mass shape, you'll have a smaller light shape, and maybe you can add some figures into it, or even just one figure in the focal area. In that way, you're accentuating a very simple composition and forcing the viewer to look at what you've managed to achieve with your brushwork and your color, because no longer is it a chaotic composition of having everything crammed into the scene. You've now simplified it, right? And that is an extremely important skill that you need to have, how to simplify down to that important strong composition. And then you can really go for it with your color and brushwork and make it attractive. So finding beauty in the mundane forces us to look beyond the superficial. Things like dirt, litter, noise, a lot of people, maybe it's just overwhelming. Perhaps you can step back or maybe go into a shop, look at the scene from a window, and as I said, perhaps take some photographs as well, quick snaps of what you think looks promising, but you want to re-look at it in a quieter moment. Then maybe go sit down, have a cup of coffee, and just look at the photos, or go back to your studio and get to work. You can then transform the scene with your color and composition and turn something very ordinary into something visually compelling. Now, examples of transforming socially upsetting scenes into attractive compositions. You can maybe consider an informal settlement. I know I've painted a few of those. We have those in South Africa, and sometimes you have to look beyond what is the poverty even of the scene and living circumstances of people in those townships, and look rather at very often what people are doing to improve their own lives in that settlement. We get, for example, the houses are painted in attractive pastel colors maybe. There could be bright clothing on the washing lines. So we, as artists, need to accentuate that and focus on the pattern that those shapes are creating. So by emphasizing also those elements, those fundamentals in a composition, and working with the color and the color temperature, maybe cool blues, warm orange colors, we get a sort of a pulsating energy starts to happen. In this way, we develop our ability to see like an artist, and this encourages us to look beyond stock photos, maybe seek out more scenes through our own experience, take photos, work from our own photos, and that way develop how you look at a subject. Transforming what's ugly into something beautiful is a skill. It does require time and practice. Yes, there are certain scenes that you won't paint. I'm not going to paint, for instance, cars on a highway with concrete apartment blocks on each side. But maybe if I was standing on the sidewalk and was looking at the shadows cast by the buildings across the road, and maybe the multitude of colorful pedestrians walking around, yes, maybe I could create something out of that. Of course, if you're in that sort of city environment, you can always find a way to take a day trip, get out of it. Maybe there's a park. There could be a pond in the park. That's very often something you'll find. Or maybe there's a town square or something like a mall that's open open air mall and there's some trees and a few attractive elements to it. So it does mean going out of your way occasionally to find something that's more attractive, more appealing. Maybe you can take a drive into the countryside and get something that's a little more appealing. Small farms, at least look for trees and some atmosphere. The smog-filled city in the distance can be simplified into something more atmospheric using blues and violet colors, while you can then emphasize the warm landscape in the foreground. But I do want to emphasize the importance of starting to go beyond the format of a photograph and accepting everything within the four sides of that photo as sacrosanct. You have to start cropping in, leaving certain things out, and maybe even adding a few extra things in. Maybe extend a shadow so that it covers the entire road instead of just a part of the road. And that would improve the composition. Depending on what the scene is, you may have to add figures or maybe remove figures from the scene and just have one or three figures instead of 20. It all comes down to trying to bring an extra element to a scene that is an emotional interpretation of the scene beyond the reality of the scene. Nobody said we had to recreate a photo in a realistic way. You can, of course, bring your interpretation to it. But the first thing is get some inspiration going. And by doing that, you're going to want to work on the scene's composition and then try out the colors and brushwork to transform that into something special. So practice the idea of seeing like an artist, even when you're taking a walk or driving in the car and you're looking at your environment. Try to pick out things, little vignettes, little stories that are happening within the larger scene. And you may find that you start coming up with ideas that are inspirational for your painting. Above all, though, don't give up. Keep an open mind. Keep looking. Keep thinking about what I've said about composition, color, and trying to find that sort of niche subject, that focal point within the larger scene, and you may just be surprised of how much you can discover. So I hope that gives you something to consider if you are feeling a bit stuck, and now you can go out there with a different mindset and try to find 2, 3, 5 potential subjects within the larger scene itself, and then try them out. Just practice, even if it is just a study for your own experimentation in your studio. Very important to do these things and not expect to have a perfect painting every time, but rather working through the problem is going to make you a stronger artist in the long run. Okay, that was something that I'd been wanting to actually cover for some time, and thanks for sending me that question. And if you have any other questions or thoughts on things that are blocking you from your creative process, let me know. I also want to tell you about a new book that I've published, and it's called The Creative Awakening, and it's all about how to remove barriers to your creativity and how to see the world a little differently so you can bring your own creative experience to the world, get your creative inspiration going again, and put yourself first. Get your art going. Don't wait for the perfect time. Now is the perfect time to get back into your creativity. So have a look for the book. You'll find it on Amazon in paperback or ebook, and you'll also find a few other books of mine there as well. But The Creative Awakening, I think it is something that will be helpful to all creative people wanting to get more time and effort into their art and crafts. So check that out on Amazon, and I hope you have a good time reading that. All right, until next time, enjoy your painting, and cheers for now.